which it sprung forgotten. You are right. But if you look long into human nature, you will see that the bonds which hold the firmest are not material ones. That an idea will make a man and mold a character. That it lies at the source of all heroisms, and is to be courted or feared, as the case may be. For me, it possessed a power proportionate to my loneliness. I don't think there was ever a more lonely child. My father and mother were so unhappy in each other's companionship that one or other of them was almost always away. But I saw little of either even when they were at home. The constraint in their attitude toward each other affected their conduct toward me. I have asked myself more than once if either of them had any real affection for me. To my father I spoke of her, to her of him, and never pleasurably. This I am forced to say, or you cannot understand my story. Would to God I could tell another tale. Would to God I had such memories as other men have, of a father's clasp, a mother's kiss. But no, my grief, already profound, might have become abysmal. Perhaps it is best as it is. Only, I might have been a different child, and made for myself a different fate. Who knows? As it was, I was thrown almost entirely upon my own resources for any amusement. This led me to a discovery I made one day. In a far part of the cellar, behind some heavy casks, I found a little door. It was so low, so exactly fitted to my small body, that I had the greatest desire to enter it. But I could not get around the casks. At last an expedient occurred to me. We had an old servant who came nearer loving me than anyone else. One day, when I chanced to be alone in the cellar, I took out my ball and began throwing it about. Finally, it landed behind the casks, and I ran with a beseeching cry to Michael to move them. It was a task requiring no little strength and address, but he managed, after a few Herculean efforts, to shift them aside, and I saw with delight my way opened to that mysterious little door. But I did not approach it then. Some instinct deterred me. But when the opportunity came for me to venture there alone, I did so, in the most adventurous spirit, and began my operations by sliding behind the casks and testing the handle of the little door. It turned, and after a pull or two, the door yielded. With my heart in my mouth, I stooped and peered in. I could see nothing, a black hole and nothing more. This caused me a moment's hesitation. I was afraid of the dark, had always been. But curiosity and the spirit of adventure triumphed. Saying to myself that I was Robinson Crusoe exploring the cave, I crawled in, only to find that I had gained nothing. It was as dark inside as it had looked to be from without. There was no fun in this, so I crawled back, and when I tried the experiment again, it was with a bit of candle in my hand and a surreptitious match or two. What I saw, when with a very trembling little hand I had lighted one of the matches, would have been disappointing to most boys, but not to me. The litter and old boards I saw in odd corners about me were full of possibilities, while in the dimness beyond I seemed to perceive a sort of staircase which might lead— I do not think I made any attempt to answer that question even in my own mind. But when, after some hesitation and a sense of great daring, I finally crept up those steps, I remember very well my sensation at finding myself in front of a narrow, closed door. It suggested too vividly the one in Grandfather's little room, the door in the wainscot which we were never to open. I had my first real trembling fit here, and at once, fascinated and repelled by this obstruction, I stumbled and lost my candle, which, going out in the fall, left me in total darkness and a very frightened state of mind. For my imagination, which had been greatly stirred by my own vague thoughts of the forbidden room, immediately began to people the space about me with ghoulish figures. How should I escape them? How ever reach my own little room again, undetected and in safety? But these terrors, deep as they were nothing to the real fright which seized me when, the darkness finally braved, and the way found back into the bright wide open halls of the house, I became conscious of having dropped something besides the candle. My matchbox was gone. Not my matchbox, but my grandfather's, which I had found lying on his table and carried off on this adventure, in all the confidence of irresponsible youth. To make use of it for a little while, trusting to his not missing it in the confusion I had noticed about the house that morning, was one thing. To lose it was another. It was no common box. Made of gold and cherished for some special reason well known to himself, I had often heard him say that some day I would appreciate its value and be glad to own it. And I had left it in that hole, and at any minute he might miss it, possibly ask for it. The day was one of torment. My mother was away or shut up in her room. My father, I don't know just what thoughts I had about him. He was not to be seen either, and the servants cast strange looks at me when I spoke his name. But I little realized the blow which had just fallen upon the house in his definite departure, and only thought of my own trouble, and of how I should meet my grandfather's eye when the hour came for him to draw me to his knee for his usual good night. That I was spared this ordeal for the first time this very night first comforted me, then added to my distress. He had discovered his loss and was angry. On the morrow he would ask me for the box, and I would have to lie, for never could I find the courage to tell him where I had been. Such an act of presumption he would never forgive, or so I thought as I lay and shivered in my little bed. That his coldness, his neglect, sprang from the discovery just made that my mother, as well as my father, had just fled the house forever, was as little known to me as the morning calamity. I had been given my usual attendance and was tucked safely into bed. But the gloom, the silence which presently settled upon the house had a very different explanation in my mind from the real one. My sin, for such it loomed large in my mind by this time, coloured the whole situation and accounted for every event. At what hour I slipped from my bed onto the cold floor I shall never know. To me it seemed to be in the dead of night, but I doubt if it were more than 10. So slowly creep away the moments to a wakeful child. I had made a great resolve. Awful as the prospect seemed to me, frightened as I was by the very thought, I had determined in my small mind to go down into the cellar and into that midnight hole again in search of the lost box. I would take a candle and matches, this time from my own mantel shelf, and if everyone was asleep, as appeared from the deathly quiet of the house, I would be able to go and come without anybody ever being the wiser. Dressing in the dark, I found my matches and my candle, and, putting them in one of my pockets, softly opened my door and looked out. Nobody was stirring. Every light was out except a solitary one in the lower hall. That this still burned conveyed no meaning to my mind. How could I know that the house was so still and the rooms so dark because everyone was out searching for some clue to my mother's flight? If I had looked at the clock, but I did not. I was too intent upon my errand, too filled with the fever of my desperate undertaking, to be affected by anything not bearing directly upon it. Of the terror caused by my own shadow on the wall as I made the turn in the hall below, I have as keen a recollection today as though it happened yesterday. But that did not deter me. Nothing deterred me, till, safe in the cellar, I crouched down behind the casks to get my breath again before entering the hole beyond. I had made some noise in feeling my way around these casks, and I trembled lest these sounds had been heard upstairs. But this fear soon gave place to one far greater. Other sounds were making themselves heard. A din